So when people ask me, I usually answer that I'm an activist, and I think this is probably my earliest identity of how I am in the world when I think back of kind of any semi-professional capacity. And for many years, I have spent working on the outside, on kind of changing different things in the world. And over the last 5 years, I've come much more into touch with the idea that we also need to change on the inside.
If you could snap with your fingers and then just provide an experience for a selected group of people that you can choose, who would be the people and what would be the experience?
I think the experience that I would choose is giving this group really a view of each other's humanity. Because I think this is something that is often so easy to deny. Whether it is someone who is in a leadership position, whether they're a president or of a country or a CEO of a big organization, I think they oftentimes have difficulties seeing how people that are very different from themselves still claim a similar type of humanity.
Hi, and welcome everyone to today's podcast episode of Essence. Today I have the great honor to have with me Daniel Hires. Daniel Hires is a social entrepreneur and activist. He has a background in innovation and strategy, describes himself as a wanderer between worlds, and has been actively shaping the development of an organization called Inner Development Goals. In this episode, we will be talking about topics such as what organizations can learn from children. What are the future skills and capacities that we need to navigate these challenging and turbulent times? We'll also be talking about the importance of integrating different perspectives. And Daniel will be sharing about his personal story. So I'm really looking forward to this episode and welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm super curious and looking forward to our conversation and where we'll take us. And I was actually now also wondering, if you want to share, which state you are arriving, how are you currently arriving in this very moment, and yeah, what brings you here? What sensations are with you in this very moment?
So I'm arriving from a very hectic morning. We have a 6-year-old daughter. I brought her to school this morning, breakfast, all of these things. Then afterwards, the admin, the WhatsApp groups with the other parents. So that's a bit of the energy that was kind of before I came into here. And now, fortunately, we've had a few moments to arrive here before we started the recording. So I'm in a much calmer space. I think my thoughts are slowly sorting a little bit of what could be interesting to explore. And I'm just really happy to be connecting with you because we have connected on different channels asynchronously. And this is the first time that we actually get to be at the same time in the same place. And so I'm really curious to, have this conversation with you.
Beautiful. Thanks for letting us into your day experience and how you're arriving. And I'm also very curious about that. And one thing that we've explored together, or how through which we connected, was the topic of children's books, stories, emotional intelligence, and being also a parent. And I was wondering if you want to share a little bit about how it is for you to be a father right now and to supporting your daughter on this way to connecting with herself, maybe to finding her path. And I'm just very curious to hear that.
Yeah, what a big question. I absolutely love being a father. It's really one of my favorite parts of myself, my favorite roles. It's not always easy. It comes with a lot of challenges, but it really feels like it's a part that makes me, more whole than I was before. And it's funny because I didn't intend necessarily to become a father, at least not in the moment that it happened. But now looking back, I'm just really grateful for being given this opportunity. And yeah, there's so many topics that we could open up about how it is in part a personal journey, how it might be making me a better person, how I learn from our daughter, how I am learning new things about life itself by looking at it through her eyes. Yeah, there's a ton of different boxes to open.
Beautiful. Yeah, as this podcast has the intention to inspire other people to live their essence.
Yeah.
And I'm so beautiful. I'm grateful for having you here and that we get to connect and I get to hear a little bit about what supports you in living your essence. How do you support others in living your essence? And in connection with your daughter in this case, I wanted to ask you like, how does she help you in becoming more yourself or being more the Daniel that you want to be?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious first answer is that you're trying to be a good example for your daughter. And so that good example, of course, is a reflection of what values do you hold. And so by looking at how am I trying to hold myself to a certain standard, I can kind of understand better what are the values that I really cherish and make them more explicit. And then, of course, by looking at where do I fail at being, this ideal self, I think that's a huge amount of learning, of self awareness, and can also help me go deeper into why am I holding certain kind of values. And is there maybe a deeper principle, a deeper value behind that? And so I think that is one way in which it helps me find my essence. But I think also, um, yeah, that there is there is a playfulness that is I have more license to display when I'm around her,
Mm.
and that this is sometimes maybe more difficult to display when you're not with a child, and it makes it a lot easier to tap into that. And I really enjoy that as well, that yeah, I can just be a bit more silly, a bit trying out things, and I think it's sometimes more socially acceptable when I have the hat on as father as opposed to some of the other hats where I sometimes represent organizations or do other kinds of things, and I think it might not be received in quite the same way.
Well, if you want to share one of these moments, the Daniel with the father hat, what does that look like? What of these moments of lightness, of playfulness, of just this innocent exploration when connecting with your daughter?
I mean, the other evening we were at this kind of event from a community that kind of had a get together, and I took her with me. And there was a portion that was a bit like a presentation, and she had some patience and was kind of drawing in the corner, and then at some point she just said she has to go to the toilet, and so I went with her, and for me it provided a really good way to exit also that situation. And so when I went with her to the toilet, we kind of on the way back, we were in this nice co-working space. She saw some rocking chairs and she was like, "Can I try these out?" And I was like, "Why not? Of course, let's go." And so then we were in this meeting room with these rocking chairs, and she started taking off her shoes and jumping on the sofas. But then other people kind of on their way to the toilet, they would come and stop by and we would have a chat. And so it was really nice in a way that helped me to then be in the way that I was wanted to be, and having one-on-one conversations with people that I hadn't seen in a while, or some people that were new people to meet. I was also playing with her and allowing her to be a bit playful, where she was like, "Am I allowed to touch this? Can I take this post-it?" And I was like, as long as we're not breaking things and we're going to leave things, clean behind, I don't think anyone will have a problem with this.
What a beautiful situation. And I feel that there's so much learning in that situation.
Yeah.
And I immediately had this question, like, as you also described that you have various other roles and also move through the worlds of organizations. The first question that came up for me is, what do you think can, for example, people in leadership positions or in organizations in general learn from children, like transferring this? Because it seemed that this moment opened up so much more of this actual deeper, real connection that you were also longing for. What is it that people in organizations can learn from children?
To really recognize different people's strength. So I one example that I'm just thinking of is that there is a other girl in my daughter's class. They're all 6 years old. She's even a little bit older, and she doesn't speak in class. And there is this kind of parently kind of thing where you're thinking, this other girl, she doesn't speak. Is that going to hold my daughter back, who speaks four languages and can communicate? And the fact that she is such good friends with her, just this morning she explained to me how they're playing a game where you kind of need to speak. It's called Wolf or Lobo. And I was like, how do you play it with her? And then they just, she counts down the numbers like this for everyone visible and everything. And I thought it's just really wonderful the way that kids are adapting to this and then finding new ways of how can we get around this, rather than come with this normative sense almost to say, no, but you need to speak, and trying to fix the person. They just try to adapt and then create a situation in which that person can thrive. And I think when I think about current organizations, that is something that a lot of organizations could really learn from, especially in the times that we are in now, where so many things are shifting, so many environments, so many situations are much more complex than maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so I think this is a really important mindset, that we are able to change the way our organizations, our structures, our processes are, depending on what the environment is, rather than trying to push our normative way of thinking onto an environment that doesn't exist, onto people who are perhaps not fitting into those clean, neat categories and are simply not willing anymore to leave certain parts of their humanness behind when they come into the organization.
Beautiful, and so tangible for me. This very example of just your daughter following this playfulness and in the connection with her other friend, just exploring new ways, being like, okay, let's just adapt. Let's find a new
Yeah,
way. And
exactly. They're not
it's
saying
so
she cannot play. They're not saying that we need to play a different game. They're like, let's play the same thing, but, think of different ways of interacting. And I think that's such a important skill, I think, for the future, because I think we're going to see a lot more disruption. And a lot of times we can't go only by the ways of how things used to be in the last 15, 20, 50 years, but we need to find adaptive ways. And I think that children are really wonderful at doing that.
and it also seemed this example that comes with such easefulness. And I also, being involved in many organizations, working with organizations, I often observe as well that sometimes there's this sense of rigidity coming in. We need to do it this way, and we
Yeah.
need to do it that way, and this is the only process. And in this example with your daughter, I felt like, okay, let's just, yeah, we're just going to do it in a different way. Maybe not even
Yeah.
questioning it, being like, okay, let's explore new ways.
Yeah. And I mean, I recognized in myself, I was like, how is that going to work? And when she explained it to me, it was like, well, of course. What about the need to speak is essential to the game? And it wasn't. There's easily ways to play that are not, in this rigid way that I was thinking about the game with like rules and this and that. And so I thought that was a really good lesson this morning.
You also mentioned like future skills and how the world of work and how we will live together might be changing. And I think at this moment, it might be interesting for the people listening a little bit to your background, because I also know that you're very involved in thinking about what kind of inner capacities do we need in order to move forward as society. And there are probably many other things as well that you're currently exploring. So maybe this is a good moment if you want to share what you're interested in, what you're working on, a little bit your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So when people ask me, I usually answer that I'm an activist. And I think this is probably my earliest identity of how I am in the world when I think back of kind of any semi-professional capacity. And in for many years, I have spent working on the outside, on kind of changing different things in the world. And over the last 5 years, I've come much more into touch with the idea that we also need to change on the inside, that the world and our actions are often just a reflection of how we are on the inside. That we could even say that what we see, because of what we understand now about psychology and how we see the world, that our mind is not just an objective camera that is looking at reality in an objective way, but that we are projecting also what we expect of the world onto what we see. And so this for me has been really an important part in understanding activism from a different way. And in the last 3 years, I have been part of an organization called the Inner Development Goals, which was also looking at, if we want change in the world, what are the inner changes? What is the inner work that we need to do for this change to show up in a different kind of way? And just like the Sustainable Development Goals are providing a world or a map for the world to look at the external changes we're looking for, the Inner Development Goals framework was creating this map, this framework, this language for people to talk about what are the inner changes that we are working on.
And if you were to describe this map a little bit, what are the different elements that people that are not familiar with this framework get to know it a little bit?
So there are 23 skills that are in this framework, and they're divided into 5 dimensions. The first dimension is being, the second is thinking, the third is relating, the fourth is collaborating, and the fifth is acting. And so we can see 23 different skills ordered into these dimensions. There's things like courage and creativity in the acting part. There's things like appreciation and connectedness in the relating part. And there's things like inner compass and authenticity in the being part.
Thanks for giving this overview of the map. And I was also wondering to hear a perspective on, like, you're currently in Barcelona, I'm currently in Lisbon. If we look at these societies in that area of the world, what do you feel, which are the qualities, like these inner development goals, the capacities that we as a society might need to develop more than others? Like, where do you see like a focus in our time?
It's difficult for me to come up with the one skill that I think everyone should have, because I think, to me, there is a danger in using the IDG framework as a normative kind of way of thinking. But to me, the most powerful thing is that this is a framework that can sort out a bit, or it can function like a map. And just like on a map, you don't want to go everywhere on the map, but it's good to know where this is and this is and this is and this is, to understand which is your path. So I don't want to tell anyone, any culture, any society about what is important for them to develop, because already in that moment, I think, I've made it a little less likely that they're going to be interested in developing in this area, because I think inner development is something that has to be something that deeply ties into who you are, what you want to be, and navigating your own path. So I would find it actually quite dangerous to say this is something that we really need. I can talk about myself. And I think for me, one thing that I think I'm quite good at is the creativity and the courage side, the acting side. I think for me, one of the things that I would really like to get more in touch with, and I think it's funny because people often assume that I have this, is the inner compass, is to really understand what is my internal theory of change for the world. Because right now, I feel like that I'm a bit conflicted. I feel like there's almost two hearts beating inside me that are, on the one hand, that we are at a moment in time where things are urgent, where we need to change the processes, the structures, all of those kind of system level things. And on the other hand, there's the side in me that says, maybe all of this is too myopic. Maybe we're looking at it, not on a time scale that is actually adequate, but the project of regenerating our planet is not a 10 or 100-year project, but it's a 10,000-year project, where what we need to be doing is not so much on changing these processes and structures in our current system, but that is more connected with how can we be more empathetic? How can we show up differently for each other as humans, where we can see in each other not the person that is perhaps mad or angry or reacting, but that that child that everyone once used to be, that just had to find different coping strategies or mechanisms to keep itself safe, and therefore put layer onto layer onto layer of trauma onto themselves. And this is what is showing up when someone might be yelling at me in the streets. And that I can, in that moment, figure out how can I not react to that? And how can I not let that influence my next interaction with another human being? And not let it influence my mood and how I then show up when I come home or when I come to the office, or these kinds of things. And that's perhaps the most important change that we could make in the world, is that we start to process these kind of intergenerational traumas, these traumas that happen every day with us. And so, yeah, there's really these two thoughts that I have, and I feel like we've come a far away from the question that you actually asked, so I'll just let you bring us back to the path that we were originally on.
Well, Daniel, I really enjoyed listening to what you were sharing right now. I really enjoyed the first part of you laying out that it's a map that should not be normative, where we started, being like, this is a map, and every
Yeah.
one of us can feel into, where do I want to go? What do I want to explore more? I really enjoyed that you were saying that. And also something that you said earlier connected to this moment, this becoming aware and kind of owning the lenses through which we see the world, becoming aware of that certain experiences in our lives has shaped the lens through which we see the world. And then we project onto the world, not as a completely objective camera, just observing what's actually going on, but a lot of our experiences, we're projecting it onto the world. And that this
Yeah.
path of becoming aware of that, owning it, being able in the moment to come back to center and also see in others that this is something that is shaping all of us, and going a path where we collectively
Yeah.
can process that and meet in a space of shared humanity. I really enjoyed listening to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important to remember that, because to me, this has helped me to understand why a lot of the ways that we were trying to solve things, especially in these oftentimes hierarchically organized structures, that this will oftentimes perpetuate the perspective of some of the people who are at the top, if not the very top. And that what I think our time calls for is that we start to understand that so many people are bringing in different perspectives onto certain topics, that if we erase that, if we don't include that in the way that we're trying to solve issues, then we're always going to fall short. And so to me, there is oftentimes a very moral way to talk about we need to include everyone, we need to have different perspectives, we need to include the historically marginalized. And of course, I think there is a moral dimension to that. But even if we take that whole morality out of it, I think for the sake of having better outcomes, we need other perspectives at the table. I think very much that some of the most underutilized brilliance or genius is not necessarily already in the elite places in town, but it exists in the jails, in the refugee centers, in, the outliers of society that right now we don't really look at, that they are possible to make any meaningful contribution to, these big problems that we see in the future. But I think those are actually essential. And until we've kind of brought in those perspectives, I think it'll be really difficult to come up with solutions that are going to be satisfying.
If you look out to the world, where do you see like pockets of hope, like projects where you feel these people are already working on this, or where you feel in this community people are at least trying to live in that way? Can you point us towards any of these projects where you feel like, because maybe someone is listening completely overwhelmed now, being like, okay, we are screwed. And maybe there are pockets of hope or directions that people can direct themselves to.
I think in many different places that are experimenting with community in this kind of way that goes beyond the transactional, that is something that is really important and interesting. And I think we see that in the Western world oftentimes happen at festivals. And we have spoken, or I have been part of different types of festivals in life, and I think that these are wonderful moments when we can try to give people an experience that is different from what they would experience out there in the world. And to me, this is one of the strongest ways in which we can start to create change, because I think we oftentimes need to have a glimpse of, what Charles Eisenstein calls the more beautiful world that our hearts know are possible. And that sometimes we don't believe that these things are possible until we've experienced it in real life. And that can open up the possibility that we can start imagining maybe we can do this in more places. And of course, there is the example of Burning Man, where there's also a very strong gift economy culture. But I think in many festivals, we can see this, then when people are coming together and being thrown out of their usual structures, that then behaviors start to adapt and change. And that is an opportunity for us to play in a different way. And I think playfulness is another important part in that.
And that connects also to the experience in the moment that you shared with your daughter, this playing to explore new worlds, playing to explore a new way of being with one another. And I find it also so powerful what you were saying about it's about the experience. If people experience, oh, this is also possible, then that might open a door to walking closer to that direction, or just a door to inviting more courage to exploring something that was completely unknown. And I see
Yeah.
behind you, there's this little post-it saying imagination activist.
Yeah.
Is that related with connecting or inviting people to imagine a different future?
So this is a poster from a friend of mine who has an organization called Moral Imaginations, and she's bringing people into a much more imaginative space for the future, because oftentimes it can feel like all of these topics of thinking about the future, innovation, kind of happen in a certain box, and that we really need to break out of that in order to come to a different way of looking at the future. One way to think about it is that if we're only looking at the future through the problems that we're facing, we're always almost walking backwards into that future, always looking at the problems. And that if we want to have a more generative way of thinking about the future, it would be helpful to dive a bit more into and lean into our capacity to imagine. I think these two are related, and I also think that something is missing from a lot of the initiatives around bringing social change, and that is that there is often this implicit theory of change that if we get people to think differently, they will act differently. And to me, it's always been the opposite. If we get people to act differently, that experience might actually change how they are thinking. And so we can sometimes, almost have this obsession with trying to get people to understand, look at how dramatic climate change will be, look at how horrible the moral injustice of this is. And I think this is all important work, and I don't want to take away any of it. But I think what's also important is that we start to get people just into different situations where they need to act differently. And then the cognitive dissonance will help in them possibly thinking differently of themselves. One example that I use is that for years I was organizing a climate protest that would put DJs on electric cars. We would put wireless headphones onto participants, and we would be silently dancing through the streets of Berlin. And on the one hand, this was a bit new and refreshing because in Berlin, there's about 10 demonstrations every day. So oftentimes people don't really care about your demonstration. And this aggressive vibe of a mob going through the streets and yelling, that wasn't really the message that we wanted to have. But on the other hand, there was that element that we didn't really care who was coming to the protest. Everyone was welcome, even if the only reason they were there is that they really liked the DJ, or there was maybe someone else who came that they just wanted to impress or hang out with. But that was totally fine because I was always thinking that probably by the time they went home or at a later time, that they would start also thinking of themselves maybe in a different way. Maybe they would have this dissonance of, like, I've never been an activist, and was that really activism? We were just kind of dancing through the street. But I think this has the biggest potential to change people because, again, I think if we start to tell people what to think, that's a surefire way to turn them off and maybe even get them to go in the other direction. But if we just give people a way to experience reality, and possibly shape that experience to have something that is surprising, I think they're going to figure out the rest. And this is, to me, how you actually treat people in a more respectful and adult way. That, I'm not here to tell you what to think, but I'm here to maybe create a different reality, a different experience, and then you can take out of it what you think is learning from it.
I really enjoy this approach, and also what you said about kind of if we go through the world looking through the problem lens, we kind of recreate the past. And I also see that if we go to the streets and in a way that is recreating a pattern of the past, like you were mentioning, the aggressive mob running through the streets, that will just get all the other projections that all other demonstrations also got. And if it's like this surprising shift of something is different about this, and it feels like to me it's a more engaging way. It's that people actively choose to engage, to think about what is going on here, why is it different, and I'm actually enjoying it, interesting, and then providing an experience that they can then take home and share with others. And I was also wondering which kind of, like, if you could snap with your fingers and then just provide an experience for a selected group of people that you can choose, who would be the people and what would be the experience?
Wow. Hmm. I think I would try to choose the most heterogeneous group. And I think the experience that I would choose is giving this group really a view of each other's humanity. Because I think this is something that is often so easy to deny. Whether it is someone who is in a leadership position, whether they're a president or of a country or a CEO of a big organization, I think they oftentimes have difficulties seeing how people that are very different from themselves still claim a similar type of humanity. I think of it as people who are on opposite sides of a spectrum are quick to deny each other's humanity, and that we have similar emotions, that we have pain that we go through in our lives, that we have trauma that we've accumulated. And if people could see each other more like that, I think that would be something that we would really need in the world. I mean, I'm just thinking about the horrors that are happening right now in Gaza, and that there is an Israeli society that is not at all seeing or getting messages of the humanity of these people. They're oftentimes being dehumanized. And I think, on the other hand, there's also a lot of narratives that are about how terrible the Israelis are, not recognizing of their own trauma. And, me having a German passport, of course, being very sensitive to, that trauma and, the role of ancestors in my family that have contributed to that. But I think that if we are able to somehow wave that magic wand where people from these different sides could actually come together and really listen and really see, and I don't know exactly what that magic wand, all of the things that magic wand would need to do, because I think there's cultural conditioning, there's the traumas, there's the shadows that all need to be processed. But to me, I think that would create some of the biggest change that is, for me at least, possible to imagine.
Experiencing this shared humanity.
Yeah.
When listening to you, I really got the chills, actually. Just imagining this group of people in a space and state where everyone really opens, like where there's this intrinsic longing to open to different perspectives and really wanting to feel, how is it to be in your shoes? How does it feel like to be you?
Yeah. And that we perhaps can start to understand more and more decisions, not just from a easy perspective of, that's a bad person, but that perhaps that was a bad decision, but that the person behind is not necessarily bad. And I think I talk a lot with my daughter about it, because of course when she's really young, it's easy to just say, this is bad, this is good. And I'm already now trying to give her this perspective. So for example, from an early age on, she's always been super anti-smoker. And of course, it was easy to just, paint the smoker as this bad person and all of that. But for the last year, we've talked a lot more about this is not a bad person. This is just a person that is perhaps weak in some ways, is perhaps needs the cigarette in order to deal with something else in their life. Maybe they're using it as a way to reduce stress in their life because this is how they have been taught. And that we should not look down on people who do bad things, but that we should try at least to find some compassion, because we should assume that they want to do good things, but something got in their way. And I think that if we can and that is not to take away from any accountability and responsibility. Of course, if you are a smoker and you're blowing smoke in my child's face, you need to be accountable for that. I can't just say, no, this is because, you had a really difficult day. No, I don't want to take away the accountability, but I also don't want to put people into this black and white thinking that this is a good or a bad person. And it's a really fine line, I think, but I think it's really important that we are able to see each other in this way.
Yeah, I think about this topic also a lot. And this combination of, first, that's how I see the world. I want to assume that everyone follows good intentions, given the capacity and everything that shaped them. And this is kind of given the lenses that this person is currently wearing and through which he or she is seeing the world. And seeing that it's probably some kind of strategy to meet some kind of need. And this need is a universal need. And we all share these needs. And the strategies might be really strange. And I personally don't like certain strategies. And also acknowledging what you've been sharing earlier on, that it's not just our current needs in this state, yet it's also what we've been carrying with us through trauma, through generational trauma, that this is something that is so deep in our system that it's just constantly running how we perceive the world. And that it's this combination of elements that is defining how, or shaping a lot of our experience of the world. And that's actually also one of the reasons why I started writing these children's books, and you have two of them, because I have this deep longing that people can grow up, and that's children growing up and also their parents or people taking care of them, that this knowledge is just accessible and present.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we see that much more now that this knowledge is already more present in the next generations. I just wanted to mention one thing about the topic before, and I think that there is a way that people could understand this as being naive. That if we always think that people have the best intentions, that it's very easy to go look at, does someone who is my competitor and is trying to push me out of business and is, really like coming with this competitive mindset, they don't have the best intentions for me. And I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that there are people who are out there having strategies that are destructive or showing actions that are not necessarily compassionate or in the best interest. But that I think that all of this, that underneath there, that if we really look at the reasons, that it is often that is hurt people are trying to hurt people. And I think that for me is really the difference between what can sometimes sound a little bit naive and all think like, we're all peace and love and harmony. And then looking at the world and seeing so many challenging narratives to that. And so I just wanted to mention that for me, what I look at is not necessarily, I don't want to deny that there are people out there who come maybe with some bad intentions. But those bad intentions are often produced by something that is really about keeping themselves safe and trying to do something good originally.
Yeah, I really like it. And also want to double down on that, just this quickly also for everyone.
Yeah.
If if your nervous system is perceiving a threat in your environment, it's
Yeah,
probably because it's been shaped and conditioned in a way to see this is a social threat and I need to do
yeah,
something about it. So a
yeah,
person in this state can feel that everyone is attacking them. And that's the perception. And based on this perception, the good intention that I see is that the person wants to feel safe. And it's like, my
yeah,
intention is I want to feel
exactly.
safe. And then might choose a strategy which is super harmful to others to protect themselves from a perceived
Yeah,
threat, which might actually not be such a big threat, but because of trauma and experiences, the nervous system just perceives it in this way. And um, yeah, that's how I also connect the dots there.
yeah, and I think that in your book, the way that you also bring in this, that there is a protector in ourselves, and that when we perceive a threat, that it kind of triggers the fight, flight, or freeze moment, and then kind of using animals for that. I think that has been really helpful to also explain to our daughter that, yeah, it's not necessarily that this is a bad person, but they're probably feeling unsafe and they're using one of these coping strategies, and perhaps one of these strategies has become so normal to them that this over the years has maybe become their personality in a way. But at the origin of this was actually really the need to feel safe, and that the way of how we can try to roll that back, that if someone is aggressive to us or is not nice to us, that we are not aggressive back, but that we can figure out a way to make them feel a bit more safe, and then see, does that actually, reduce a bit their need to show up as aggressive or in a different way.
Beautiful. And actually, what also came to my mind is as you were speaking about taking different perspectives and empathy, building
Yeah.
empathy with others. I'm currently actually writing a third book on this topic of taking perspectives
Hey.
and empathy, because I was also thinking this is what the world also needs, or what the world needs, what I would love
Yeah.
for the world to integrate more. So it's
Yeah.
beautiful, interesting that you mentioned it right now as well.
Yeah. No, and I think I really like that question. I wasn't prepared at all for it, but yeah, now I wish I really had that magic wand, because yeah, I think to me this, as someone I feel who I would describe myself as a wanderer between different kinds of worlds. I grew up in between two countries. I don't really look like any of those two countries. I've been in different kind of situations, working at the UN, working in business contexts, working in nonprofits. I feel like sometimes I am this butterfly that is trying to cross pollinate things. And sometimes what I see most clearly is that depending on which context I'm in, oftentimes organizational context, there is oftentimes these ways of looking at certain types of people, whether it's activists in the corporate side or the other way around, that in activist circles, that the people who work in corporate are seen in a different way. And yeah, I think there's really something to that, that if we could build these bridges a bit more, that it would surprise a lot of people. Surprise, I think, is one of the most effective ways in which we can trigger some kind of change, and that could really be something that could help us heal.
Thank you, Daniel. I feel that now we're naturally coming like to a close of our exploration, and I can say that I've been enjoying this a lot. And I wanted to give you the space if there's anything that you would like to share with people. If there's something where you feel like, oh, I really want to say this, or I want people to know that, or I want to encourage someone to do this or that, then this could be a moment. So if there's anything on your mind or heart that you want to share,
Mm.
feel free to do.
What I'm reflecting on is perhaps that more people, or if you have an inclination that your brain is working a little bit different, and you've been a lot of times trying to kind of fit in, that perhaps the answer is less into the fitting in and of course some fitting in probably always has to happen, but that also really looking into and leaning into the strengths and leaning into what gifts you have because of that. I think that is going to become more and more and more important as we're navigating this kind of world of turmoil. And I'm thinking back almost to the beginning when we talked about the one girl that didn't talk, and that it's easy to just try to push her into this framework of no, but she's 6 years old, she should be talking to other people. That yeah, I think that wherever you feel a bit like that there's parts of you that don't quite fit in, that is becoming more and more important that we bring that out. And not only where you feel like that, but where you can maybe see also other people where they perhaps struggle with certain things. And for ADHD minds, it's sometimes to stay in a certain type of structure or to not forget certain things, or that if you when you see that you don't see it as too bad, this is not going to work out, or this is not going to fit, or so, but that you can then start to playfully maybe reimagine how does the structure, perhaps, how could it adapt in order to really leverage some of that superpower? Because I really do think that some of these talents are superpowers in the way that, I'm able to recognize certain patterns. I'm able to kind of pick up on things that other people would never pick up on. And I can see that already in my daughter, and it's something that I'm a lot like sitting with a lot. Like, how can I make her feel like that these are superpowers and not feel ostracized or judged or blamed for that, and internalize that before it ever gets out there, but that she can recognize that difference and really celebrate it.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for sharing this piece of wisdom and your personal experience. And I feel that you inspired me a lot in this conversation. I can see how you inspire so many people in the world and to live their essence and be like, these are my superpowers. How can I live that more? And I really enjoyed what you were saying about how can the structures maybe be shaped in a way that supports all of us in just being more ourselves and seeing that as living our superpowers, being the greatest contribution to the world is being ourselves. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this, and for everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed this as well. I'm looking forward to the next episode of Essence.